I knew something was wrong the second I smelled burnt coolant and synthetic polymer through a wall that was supposed to be rated for chemical resistance. That stench doesn't just hang in the air, it warns you. And that Friday, around 4:58 p.m., I was the only one who heard the warning scream before the fire suppression system ever had a chance to. But hey, according to Colin, I was just the clipboard girl, or his favorite nickname when trying to flex in front of his boardroom bimbos, Sweetie. Right before he tossed my final safety report, my ninth in 2 months, into a puddle like it was gum wrapper trash. It landed face down, ink smudging, timestamp still clear as day. I watched him saunter off to his car, blazer flapping like a used car ad in the wind, grinning at his reflection in the window of a black SUV that didn't even belong to him. That report wasn't paranoia. It was a damn countdown. Line 3 had been showing irregular thermal sensor behavior for weeks, same pattern every time. Abnormal heat spikes, override logged without trace, and pressure drift on the B segment valve. It was supposed to be impossible to override the cooling bypass without dual keycard auth. I documented every one of those impossible events, not once, not twice, 9 times. I logged it in our system, backed it up to my private cloud, took field photos, sent a copy to my own inbox every damn time with red receipts. Because I knew one day Colin's ignorance wasn't going to be harmless. If you're still listening, pause just a second. 97% of folks watching these never subscribe or like, and I get it, life moves. But if you're even half as fired up as I was watching a $3,000 thermal imager scream at a blind wall of corporate arrogance, hit the button. It keeps the team pushing these stories into the light. Anyway, that Friday, I handed in my last warning. Not just digitally, I printed it, walked it down to Colin's office, knocked, waited. He didn't even look up when I said, "It's about line 3 again. Thermal failsafe isn't cycling." He laughed. "Back to your desk, sweetie. We're running production, not paranoia." Then he grabbed it, folded it without reading, and dropped it outside in the puddle by the loading dock as he strolled off to a team dinner with the board VP, who I knew for a fact couldn't tell a hydraulic manifold from a microwave. I stood there for a moment, soaked shoes, coolant in the air, paper bleeding into the water. Then I pulled out my phone, snapped a photo of the report in the puddle with my watch's time in frame. Timestamp was my insurance. I scooped up the report, slid it into a plastic sheet in my field binder. Waterproof, because after 7 years in safety ops, you stop trusting paper to protect you. On the way back to the floor, one of the junior techs, Aaron, glanced at me with that pity smile people give the person who always brings bad news. "You good?" he asked. I nodded. "Just filing for the apocalypse." He chuckled nervously, probably thought I was joking, but I wasn't. In that moment, I wasn't angry, not even shocked, just tired. Tired of being treated like I was the weird, clipboard-carrying doomsday cultist when all I ever wanted was for people to not die doing their jobs. 9 reports, 9 silent alarms, and one arrogant man who thought he was too charming to fail. I went home. Didn't even eat. Just sat on the couch, binder on my lap, watching the clock. I had this feeling I couldn't shake, like the silence before a pressure seal gives. That hiss in the distance no one else hears until it's too late. And the worst part? I already knew the line wouldn't make it through the weekend. I just didn't know how many people it'd take with it. The week before everything melted, literally and metaphorically, they cut our safety review slots from 40 minutes to 15, calling it a lean forward compliance initiative. That's corporate for check less, shut up more. Colin, now strutting around in his tailored button-downs and beard oil you could smell 2 rooms over, stood in front of the safety team and told us, smirking, "Let's focus on what matters. Morale, engagement, smiles on faces, not doom on dashboards." He even had a damn PowerPoint slide with a gif of someone hugging a fire extinguisher. I wish I were making that up. I raised my hand. "What about the line 3 bypass flags? We've logged 3 in the last 7 days, none of which followed override protocol." Colin didn't even blink. "False positives," he said, already glancing toward the hallway where Madison from procurement, junior VP, recent MBA grad, probably the only person here more allergic to steel toe boots than he was trying to figure out how not to trip over a pallet jack. He smiled at her like he was auditioning for the Bachelor Safety Violations Edition, then looked back at me. Don't stress, clipboard. The system's got redundancy. Clipboard. That was his new thing. Didn't matter if I had a binder, a thermal scanner, or a laptop. I was clipboard. And in meetings, I was lucky to be called anything at all. I'd speak up and they'd talk over me. Once, when I flagged a discrepancy in the valve logging system, one of the ops guys muttered under his breath, "There she goes again, clipboard Jesus, saving the plant one inspection at a time." The room laughed. Colin did too. That part hurt more than I like to admit. But laughing didn't erase the data. The problem wasn't disappearing just because they were tired of hearing about it. I took my field log, black moleskin, numbered pages, time-stamped entries, and marked down the third unauthorized bypass that week. Line 3 again, same thermal sensor sequence. The digital control panel showed no override history. Nothing. No credentials logged, no alert sent to control, which meant either the system failed to report or someone found a way around the logging sequence. That was a violation, not a mistake, not a noise, a full-blown violation of system integrity protocols. And I knew if I took it to Colin, I'd get the same line. "We're not hunting ghosts, clipboard." He'd already chewed me out the week before for making the interns nervous by referencing failure curves in a calibration meeting. So I added it to the log, pinned a sticky note on the binder. Ghost number 3, no login, no trail, heat spike plus 120 by dus degrauw in 30s. I snapped another photo, synced it to my private archive. It wasn't just insurance at that point. It was a damn eulogy in progress. That Friday afternoon walkthrough, Madison came down to tour the production floor in her heels like she was scouting for a Nordstrom shoot, not a foam insulation line. Colin trailed her like a cologne ad with a clipboard of fake charts and buzzwords he barely understood. When they passed near line 3, I tried again. "You need to see this," I said, pointing to the thermal readout showing an active fluctuation. "There's been another bypass event. This one's climbing faster than the last." Colin gave me a look like I'd farted in church. "Relax, clipboard. It's sunny outside. Maybe the sensor's just hot." Madison giggled. He walked off, her heels clicking beside his loafers like punctuation marks on my irrelevance. I stared at the screen. I swear the sensor graph pulsed like a heartbeat. Erratic. Rising. The line didn't know it was being ignored. It just kept heating. That night, I lay in bed replaying everything in my head. Colin's smirk, Madison's laugh, the red spike on the monitor like a warning flare no one wanted to see. And I realized something cold and final. They weren't just ignoring me. They were betting I'd give up before the system gave out. At 4:58 p.m. sharp, I hit send on the last report I'd ever file under Colin's command. Subject line: critical fault, manual override suspected. Not, maybe, not possible, suspected. Because I had enough logs to choke a compliance officer and the heat patterns didn't lie. But I already knew what would happen. HR would thank me for my diligence. Safety ops would mark it for Monday's agenda. And Colin? Colin would either ignore it or weaponize it against me during his next weekly performance review, probably while sipping craft bourbon and misquoting OSHA standards to the board. I printed a copy anyway. A hard copy still screams when everything else gets deleted. I walked it to his office. The door was open. I didn't knock, just stepped in and held it out. He was mid-scroll on his phone, wearing that smug little half-smile he saved for Instagram filters and public gaslighting. "What is it now?" he muttered without looking up. I kept my voice flat. "Line 3, critical fault. I'm flagging another unauthorized override. Temp spikes match the last 3. He flicked his eyes to the page, read nothing but the bold subject header. Then, with a dramatic sigh, he stood up, grabbed the report like it offended him, and brushed past me. "Back to your desk, sweetie," he said, already halfway down the hall. "Some of us have dinners to attend." I followed him to the loading dock, mostly out of habit, watching as he tossed the page over his shoulder into a greasy puddle by the dumpsters like he was discarding a gum wrapper. It landed upside down, edges curling in the water like it was trying to crawl away from the whole damn building. He didn't even turn around, just pulled out his keys, checked his reflection in the window of a Lexus that wasn't his, and climbed into the passenger seat like nothing in the world could touch him. I stood there for maybe 3 seconds. No words, no breath. Just the sound of a fan spinning too fast inside the wall and the distant hiss of something venting that shouldn't be. Then I pulled out my phone, walked over, snapped a photo of the report in the puddle, making sure my watch face was in the frame. 4:59 p.m., the final minute of my last attempt to save this place from its own arrogance. I fished the paper out, tucked it in a plastic sleeve, and slid it into the back of my binder. That thing weighed almost 10 pounds now. 9 months of ignored warnings and brushed off paranoia. As I zipped it closed, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. Aaron, the junior tech, standing by the door to maintenance. He wasn't saying anything, just watching. Our eyes met. He looked like he wanted to speak, but all he did was give me a small nod. I gave one back. I didn't say a word to anyone else. I walked straight to my car, drove home with the windows down, and let the wind tear the frustration off me like dead skin. No music, no podcasts. Just the sound of tires on pavement and the kind of silence that comes when you finally stop screaming into the void. I didn't check my email that night. Didn't check it the next morning either. By then, I figured the line would either hold or it wouldn't. But if it didn't, there'd be no more sweeties, no more puddles, no more pretending, only facts, and a binder full of proof. The first siren hit at 6:12 a.m. Saturday morning. I was already awake, not because I'm some kind of early bird, but because I hadn't slept. My gut had been twisting all night like someone was slowly ratcheting a clamp around it. I'd stared at the ceiling for hours, replaying every red flag in that goddamn binder. So when the plant alarm bleated out across the valley and my phone lit up with emergency dispatch alerts, I didn't even flinch. Just grabbed my jeans, steel toes, and binder and was out the door in under 3 minutes. No one had called me. I wasn't on the response roster, but I knew what it was. By the time I rolled into the back lot, there was already a haze settling over the east wing of the facility. Pale gray smoke hung like a low ceiling over the fire doors, and the air stank of scorched plastic and ozone, Line 3's signature. The same line I'd been warning about for 9 months. The same goddamn line Colin said was running fine because it hadn't exploded yet. The scene was chaos in slow motion. Fire suppression foam clung to the windows in thick streaks. 2 of the big melt vessels were visible through the cracked side panel, one intact, the other warped and leaning like a kicked trash can. A coolant line had ruptured, spraying into the walk path where QA usually stood for final batch checks. Thank God it was a weekend. If it had been Tuesday at full staff, we'd be counting body bags, not invoices. I stayed behind the emergency tape, pulled out my camera, not my phone, my real one. The DSLR I kept in my trunk for documentation. Zoomed in on the rupture seam on the cracked vessel. Saw what I was expecting. Blistering near the base from internal heat, not pressure. That meant the thermal bypass never engaged. I checked my binder. Page 174, same heat zone, same pattern. I took the photo, then another, and another. I documented, just like always. Inside, the conference rooms were waking up. I could see shadows moving behind the frosted glass upstairs. Security letting in execs. Someone dragging a coffee urn across tile. A manila folder slapped too hard on a desk. The COO's sedan was in the lot, parked crooked. That told me everything I needed to know about the mood. Colin arrived 15 minutes later, hair damp from the shower, tie loose, clearly under the impression he could bullshit his way through whatever this was. He gave a tight nod to the plant manager, who didn't even look at him, and walked into the building without noticing me at all. That was fine. I wasn't here for him. I stood by the corner of the east lot, just outside the foam perimeter, watching the response teams shuffle between containment doors and control nodes. One of the fire captains barked something about delayed suppression foam. I made a note. Fire suppression deployed almost 90 seconds late. That's not a mechanical glitch. That's an integration issue. Someone monkeyed with the automation chain. I could see a few of the maintenance guys staring through the broken line housing. 2 of them looked pale. Another one was crying and trying to hide it. They knew. Maybe not the specifics, but enough. You don't work in a plant long without learning the smell of failure. Not metaphorical failure, real failure. Steel bending, vessel cracking, insurance adjuster failure. Upstairs, behind the closed glass doors of Conference A, the emergency meeting had begun. Colin was already pacing, gesturing like an idiot, clearly doing everything but taking responsibility. I wasn't invited, but I didn't need to be. I had the data, I had the timestamps. I had the binder with the photo of his boot print next to my soaked report. I sat on the hood of my car, binder on my lap, watch ticking. I didn't know it yet, but inside that room, someone had just opened a folder. Inside, it was my final report, the one from 4:58 p.m. still smudged from the puddle, and everything was about to change. It was the kind of silence you feel before a storm, not the dramatic, thunder-cracking kind, but the cold, suffocating kind that hits when every excuse dries up in your throat. I wasn't in the room, but I know that silence I know the smell of overheated polymer. It always comes after someone opens a folder and realizes they're staring at a prophecy they ignored. That folder landed in the middle of the conference table like a dropped hammer. Facilities engineering brought it in. Alan, the kind of guy who doesn't say much unless someone's actively bleeding or a structural integrity line has gone red. He'd pulled it from the debris by line 3, found it lodged near the cracked control housing. Wet, smudged, tucked in a plastic sleeve. My final report. Critical fault, manual override suspected. Timestamp, 4:58 p.m. Friday. 22 hours before the melt vessel tore open like a soda can in a furnace. My name was on every page. Header, footer, signature line. Nobody could pretend it was a draft. Nobody could pretend they didn't get it. I'd CC'd half the safety department, HR, Colin, and the internal compliance inbox. Hell, I'd even attached 2 photos, thermal readouts from the prior week, one of which matched exactly the heat pattern recorded by the sensors minutes before the system failed. They flipped through the packet in stunned silence, foam stains bleeding the ink at the edges, but the data still perfectly legible. Page after page of logged faults, 9 months of them, each with a note, each time-stamped, each ignored. The COO finally broke the silence, fingers pressed against his lips like he was holding in a scream. Who received this? Colin cleared his throat. I did. But the wording was vague. It said suspected, and we've had false positives before. Don't, the COO snapped, eyes like ice. Just don't. Facilities dropped another photo on the table, a fresh one from this morning. Thermal sensor readouts showing the spike, identical location, same gradient shift, same exact signature. The table fell silent again. Then the COO said it, calm, flat, dangerous. Is he still here? At first, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then Aaron, the junior tech, lifted a hand like he was in class. She's outside, he said. Been here since 6, still taking pictures. They all turned. She knew. Aaron added, quieter this time. She warned us. The shift was immediate. You could feel it ripple through the room like a shock wave. Disbelief evaporated. Urgency took its place. Colin tried to speak again, but nobody was listening. Legal was already on the phone. Insurance had joined via Zoom. A rep from corporate safety pinged into the call, asking who the author of the report was and if she was in the building. They didn't even say my name, just the author. Like I'd become something else now, not a person, a reference point. The fulcrum, everything had just swung around. They sent someone to find me. I was still sitting on the hood of my car, flipping through my binder, watching the foam team recheck suppression lines. I didn't even look up until I heard my name, my real name, spoken by someone who usually called me Clipboard. Chris, they need you upstairs. I stood, slow and steady. No rush. They weren't going to start without me now. I slid the binder under my arm and walked toward the building, the smell of melted plastic still clinging to the air. For once, no one looked through me. The shift leads moved aside. A compliance officer actually opened the door for me. Aaron nodded as I passed. I didn't smile, didn't gloat, didn't say, I told you so, because I didn't have to. The data was already screaming. The door shut behind me with a hiss, like the room itself was sealing for containment. I was led in not by Colin, not by the COO, but by someone from legal, gray suit, tight mouth, zero pleasantries. The conference table was full, and the faces around it weren't just managers and floor leads anymore. A laptop screen flickered with the insurer's rep dialing in, another with corporate risk. Someone from PR stood stiff in the corner, like she'd rather be anywhere else. And Colin? He was there too, sweating under the fluorescent lights, collar tight, jaw set like he'd just swallowed a nail. The COO gestured to an empty chair across the table. Have a seat. I didn't. Not right away. Instead, I walked to the head of the table, set my binder down, not with drama, not with flair, but with the weight of 270 pages hitting engineered oak, and unzipped it. 9 months of reports. Everyone printed, time-stamped, photographed, and backed up in triplicate. Each one with metadata audits and distribution logs. I flipped it open to the tab marked Thermal Sensor, Line 3 Failures, pulled out the most recent set, and slid it across to the COO. He looked down at the photos. Ink smudged from water, but the data was still clear. Dates, temperatures, fault codes, override flags. The photo of the Friday report in the puddle with my watch face showing the time. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. He finally asked the question that had been hanging in the air like smoke. Why wasn't this escalated? I looked at him, then glanced at legal, then back at him. I filed every report through the approved chain, I said. Calm. Even. Direct to safety ops, CC'd to HR and facilities. Colin was on every distribution. Several reports included incident forecasts with margin of error overlays. I flagged 3 of them as urgent. The 4th, I marked critical. Friday's was the last. Legal nodded. We verified distribution. All the reports were received. None were flagged as spam. None were routed to archive. Mr. Conway, she glanced at Colin, received them directly. Colin's voice cracked as he leaned forward. Okay, but that doesn't prove the system override wasn't a fluke. Stop, Legal snapped, hand raised. You are not to speak again without counsel present. He froze, face blotchy, neck pulsing. I opened the binder to another tab. Override protocol chain. I pulled out a form, thermal override authorization sheet. Each thermal bypass in the system required dual sign-off. Director-level approval and systems administrator clearance. Every change was supposed to be logged in duplicate and stored with a physical signature sheet filed through compliance. Last known override was this one, I said, sliding it across. Authorization required 2 names. Collins isn't there. The COO took the paper. Then who did sign? Madison, I said. Collins' eyes went wide. She's not authorized. She was given override access on March 2nd. Legal cut in. You filed the access request yourself. Silence. The binder stayed open. My hands rested on either side of it, steady. The insurer's rep finally spoke through the laptop. From our review, the claim liability hinges on internal negligence. If the override was unauthorized and the warnings ignored, we're looking at a full exclusion of damage coverage. This becomes an internal cost. Every head turned to Colin, then back to me. The COO leaned forward. Is this all in your documentation? I nodded once. Page 198 onward. Do you have it digitized? I brought a drive, I said, sliding a USB across the table. Encrypted, time-locked. I also uploaded a full copy to the compliance vault under the case tag Landry 9. Access is restricted to executive credential holders. Legal gave me a single nod of approval. No one clapped. No one smiled. There was no speech, no round of "we owe you one." Just the shifting sound of power realigning itself in a room where silence used to be my cage. Now, it was my weapon. Monday morning felt like walking into someone else's story. The same floors, the same walls, the same flickering exit sign above the same dented break room door, but the energy was different now. No more sideways glances, no smirks, no whispered clipboard jokes behind styrofoam coffee lids. People stood when I walked in, not out of respect, not yet, but out of caution. Like they were suddenly aware I wasn't just the one who carried the binder. I was the one who knew how it ended. Colin didn't show up for the 8:15 safety sync. I already knew he wouldn't. Word spread before the elevators even finished dinging. He's on leave. Legal's involved. No big announcement, just a disappearing act. His nameplate gone from the door by noon. His inbox auto-reply cold and sterile. Currently out of office pending internal review. The junior VP, Madison, resigned that afternoon. HR phrased it like it was her idea, pursuing other opportunities. But the timing said everything. She'd been the one to sign the override authorization. She'd signed it because Colin told her it was temporary and approved. He hadn't mentioned that approval required 2 sign-offs. or that the second signature was never filed. They found the access log buried deep in the audit trail, Colin's login paired with her badge swipe. A sloppy little conspiracy sealed in metadata and arrogance. I didn't ask for his job. I want that on the record. But by Tuesday, the COO called me into his office, offered me the interim safety director role while we get things in order. Only until the dust settles, he said. I told him I'd think about it. Then I asked what the reporting structure would look like. You'll report directly to me, he said, and I could hear the shift in his voice, like this was less about a promotion and more about insurance, putting the person who saw the future into a role that might keep the company from bleeding out again. So I said yes. Not because I wanted a title, not because I wanted Colin's glass office and fake plants, because I wanted access. Access to the policies, the vendors, the system architecture. If I was going to carry the weight of being right, I was going to make sure no one else had to feel the weight of being ignored. That first day, walking into the morning debrief with my badge now coded for executive access, the room went silent when I stepped in. Not the stiff silence of resistance, the attentive kind. No one talked over me. No one cut me off. Even the senior plant ops lead, the guy who once told me safety was a nice to have, leaned in when I spoke. And Aaron? He gave me a new name when I walked past him near line 3. He grinned, half shy, and said, "They're calling you the Prophet now." I blinked. That better not be a nickname. Too late, he said. You predicted the fire. Now they think you know the future. I didn't correct him. Let them believe whatever made them listen. What I did do was take my old binder, the one with Colin's boot print still faintly stamped on the back, and set it on my new desk. I opened it to page 1. Left it there, plain as day. A reminder. This office wasn't mine because I asked for it. It was mine because they ran out of ways to deny what I saw coming. The corner office was ready by Friday. Polished desk, new nameplate, even one of those over-engineered espresso machines that always breaks when you need it most. HR sent me a congrats email with bullet points about the view, the admin support, and how the safety division is excited to have new leadership. I stared at it for a full minute before closing the tab. I didn't want it. The desk, the view, the illusion of control, they'd handed those same perks to Colin, and he'd used them to ignore people like me. I'd lived on the receiving end of that door. No way I was going to sit behind it. Instead, I sent a memo back through legal. I'd stay on one condition. I wanted field authority and direct access to the audit committee. No middlemen, no filters. If I saw a risk, I wanted the power to escalate it without begging for signatures from people who learned safety terms off PowerPoint slides. Legal agreed. Fast. We met in the same conference room where I dropped the binder a week ago. But this time, the tone was different. They weren't correcting me, they were asking questions, taking notes, listening. We rewrote the response protocols, scrapped the old matrix of informal reviews and managerial discretion. In its place, we built something clean, enforceable, and non-negotiable, a flowchart that started with sensor-level alerts and ended with executive intervention if required. No more buried warnings. No more, "we'll get to it next week." Legal called it the Landry Clause. I blinked when I saw the draft. That's dramatic. The lead counsel just smiled. Call it whatever you want. But you earned the ink. Somewhere in the chaos of restructuring, a note landed on my desk, handwritten, heavy paper, no logo, just a signature at the bottom. The CEO, Chris. We should have listened. That's on us. Thank you for not walking away. I read it twice. Folded it, slid it into the back of my logbook, behind the photo of the wet report and the time-stamped watch. Not because I needed the apology, but because someday, someone else will need proof that being right isn't always loud, and being quiet doesn't mean you're wrong. Meanwhile, I kept working. We reevaluated the sensor contracts. For years, Colin had favored a vendor with pretty graphs and slick dashboards, but garbage thermal stability. I made sure the new deal included the exact upgrade package I'd recommended 2 quarters ago: enhanced redundancy, deeper logging intervals, and a requirement for triple auth on all manual overrides. Buried in the fine print was my clause, my sensor replacement schedule hard-coded into the renewal cycle. Not a suggestion, a requirement. If they want the support contract, they stick to my calendar. Funny thing about respect, it doesn't always show up when you ask for it. Sometimes it shows up in initials scrawled at the bottom of a PDF, or in the way people stop interrupting when you speak, or in a clause no one can edit without triggering a legal review. They tried to give me the top floor. I took the basement access badge and the field tablet instead, because I don't want a title. I want a system that listens before it burns. 3 weeks later, the walls didn't look scorched anymore. The foam was gone. The rupture panels replaced. New thermal sensors blinked in quiet agreement with the field logs. Readings stable, nothing climbing without explanation. For the first time in a year, Lean 3 hummed like a machine that finally felt heard. The full safety overhaul had gone faster than anyone expected. When you remove ego from the process, the gears move smoother. The board had approved every policy I pushed forward. No edits, no delays. They didn't ask why it cost more. They asked when it would be done. Somewhere along the way, the insurer called me directly, not to interrogate, to retain. Your records, the rep said, are the only reason we didn't void the entire claim. We'd like you to consult for us on future industrial audits. I didn't say yes right away. I asked for field autonomy, conflict veto power, and a rider clause that gave me independent whistleblower status regardless of corporate alignment. They agreed within 24 hours. On the day of the final debrief, I walked into conference room A with no binder, just a thumb drive and a worn-out field tablet I'd been using since before Colin ever learned how to spell safety compliance. The table was full. COO at the head. Legal, risk, facilities, PR, a few new faces, quiet ones, listening types. The kinds of people who read more than they speak. The kinds you want in the room. I gave them the final report. No drama, no warning tone, just facts, next steps, accountability maps, and implementation timelines. When I finished, the room was still, not with tension, just clarity. The COO leaned forward. He looked older than he had a month ago, less polished, but something about him felt settled. You saved us, he said. I shook my head just once. No, I said. I warned you. He didn't argue, just nodded, slowly, like that truth had finally sunk through the layers of bureaucracy and boardroom performance. I left the room without fanfare. No applause, no speeches, just me, the tablet, and the hallway that used to echo with condescension every time my boots hit tile. Halfway down the corridor, an assistant jogged up, slightly out of breath, holding her phone in one hand and a badge lanyard in the other. Chris, she said, the board. They want to know if you'd stay on longer. Help guide the next transition. They said, she paused. They said, don't let him leave. I looked past her toward the exit, toward the smoke-free air, toward the future I never asked for, but had earned anyway. I didn't answer right away, because sometimes the loudest answer is making them wait.